Yes. Yes, you may come forward.
I filled out forms. I'm testifying as an interested party.
Okay.
Okay, so
And what is your name?
Christopher Hicks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Dean and Chair John and Vice Chair Dean for this opportunity to speak. I do not have anything on your iPads. I jumped in my car to get here because I thought it might get voted out of committee because I wanted to talk about it. I'm just a citizen in Claremont County. I didn't live in Amelia, but I volunteered and helped the people in Amelia a lot with their dissolve there. There was also a dissolve in Newtonsville that passed, and since then there have been two that have been voted on in Claremont County that have failed that I will gladly say I had nothing to do with. I only get involved with ones that I think there's legitimate reasons for a dissolve. And so I know that this is your fourth hearing, and so if you just give me a little liberty, I want to talk some, because one of my biggest issues with the bill, I said I'm an interested party because I think absolutely the statutes relating to village dissolve need to change. They're not robust enough, but when I look at the bill, I studied the bill, there's lots of underlined parts that are new, and the devil can be in the details. And through this whole process, I'd say right now you have a bill that's been written from the perspective of government. Look at the people that testify. Look at the people that support it. I contacted every person that had been involved with the committees, and I'll come back to that, for the dissolve efforts in these villages. Not a single one of them was contacted for this bill by either Representative Byrd or Representative Schmidt, and that was wrong. And because the citizen should have a voice in this. They're the ones that could tell you more about why the village dissolved or what was the thing that irked them. It wasn't a 1% income tax. They weren't that petty. So I want to just paint a little background before I get into what I think are the three things about the bill that need to be addressed of what actually happened in Amelia, okay? Of what actually happened in Amelia. There was a long streak of the citizens being abused. There was one arrested in a council meeting. It was a long streak of abuses. The mayor enriching himself. You heard about the keeping getting paid for, I think, more than a year and a half after the dissolve took place. I'll tell you what, for citizens, even a village that is past its prime and never going to grow into a city, to get citizens to dissolve it is a hard task. The elected officials really need to tick off the citizens. And really need to tick them off because there's nostalgia with the village, there's connections there, there's a feeling of status, and people don't want to admit, maybe our status is declining. They have to really tick off the citizens. And just to give you a flavor of what's involved when somebody tries, people sometimes act like, apologize for jumping around there, people act like it's knee-jerk. You get some people in a village get upset and they go down to the local watering hole and sign up a petition, and next thing you know, that's not the way it works. The village of Amelia actually took 2 election cycles to dissolve. There's another part, maybe another testimony if people talked about it, but the charter of the village, because of home rule, can set special rules for dissolve. It could set a rule like that a petition for dissolve has to have the phone number of the resident on it. And so if you turn in your petitions at the Board of Elections and it doesn't have that thing that was in the charter, the petitions get kicked. So I bet you if somebody did a study across the state of Ohio for when citizens have tried to submit a set of petitions around a village dissolve, how often do they get kicked back? It's probably, I would guess, in Claremont County, it's probably at least 65%, and that's when there's people like me in the county that can talk to people about how to format their petition. It's not an easy process. So in Amelia, they actually had to have a vote first to change the charter of the village to allow them to dissolve the village again. Because think about home rule. In the charter, they can set up different rules. That's what happened in Amelia. So when they went through one election cycle to change this charter, then the next election cycle to dissolve the village, and you can, I think somebody said 68% vote, you have to really have ticked off your citizens to get them to that point of dissolve. What happened after that was that the people that had fought the hardest against the dissolve, the mayor, the law advisor, they were getting paid. For like a year and a half, they continued to get paid. The citizens were still paying the 1% tax, had no representation in the process. So when you look at this bill, I'm going to come back to this, but one of the things is when you look at the board or whatever it's called for dissolving, how come somebody from the committee that did the ballot initiative is not a voting member of that board? Because I'll tell you the number one thing that was wrong with what happened in Amelia is that there was nobody in government that saw it as their mission to get the dissolve over with. Nobody in government. There was a time they did a town hall type thing in a middle school gym. And I counted, if I recall, across the thing, there was a table set up with 13 people across the table. Nobody could make a decision. Nobody could do anything. I get worried when I look at this bill that you have a committee that has a commissioner, recorder, auditor, and then these additional roles. Now, I know there was an amendment thing. A village rep, the village fiscal officer, the township trustee. When I start adding it up, you get to another one of these things where it's 7, 8 people. Who actually is the person who winds it down, who has a mission and a goal? So what happened in Amelia is it just drug on and on. I think they paid don't hold me exactly to this, but I think they kept paying the income tax for about a year and a half. And there was always this thing, and you heard it, there was a debt. The debt related to a TIF. The TIF was more than going to pay for the debt. Over the years, the TIF would be in effect. But they didn't put that in the calculation. The actual TIF then becomes a multi-million-dollar windfall to Pierce Township, while the people were still paying income tax. Because as you know, if you're familiar with TIFs, there's TIFs where the money's going to some specific infrastructure improvement. But a lot of times TIFs, a big chunk of the money is going to just safety services and other things like that. And that's what was happening in Amelia. But you had this illusion that there was this debt, so we need to keep taxing you. But nobody would factor in that there were actually multiple TIFs, that they were going to get millions of dollars off of TIFs that were going to be coming in. So the people keep paying their taxes. So that's one of the things that I think frustrated people in that whole process. So real quick, back to the committee. When I say I'm not talking about the committee for dissolving a township, but the committee that has to do the petitions. If you've been a township trustee, you know that there's a section that most people don't even know what it's for on the petition where you fill in a committee, names of a committee. I don't know. I just happen to know that what that's for is if you actually leave office as a trustee, if you had that filled on your petitions, then those people get to pick your replacement. Okay? But when you do a dissolve, the petitions also have a committee. So there's a set of people who have to put themselves forward in a village to say, I'm the leader of the dissolve effort. So what also happens, that some of you might live in villages, I'm sure you'll have villages in your districts, is people in most villages are afraid to come forward to do this. Not only do you have to really tick people off, but there's a strong sense, and we can have a debate after this meeting as to whether it's valid or not, that people that do this, that put forward these petitions, get on a list. And a lot of times these villages, I could think of one in Hamilton County, not associated with Claremont County, where when stuff happens, it's all of a sudden the local police have issues with you didn't keep your hedges trimmed right. Okay? So there tends to be a fear in the citizen base of this process, of coming forward and standing up and putting your hand up, especially on the top, let alone signing the petition. So the petitions also, as I mentioned, don't have a standard format. There's no prescribed format. So if I were making a change to this bill, I would say that a charter can't upend, or as much as you can do it with home rule, there has to be a standard petition for dissolve of a village. Because then the citizens, otherwise they have to have a lawyer. In Amelia, they had to pay a lawyer to write a petition for them, and still then they don't know because the Board of Elections could toss it, and they basically have no recourse then. They have to do the whole process over again. So that's just a little bit of background. So there was actually a significant surplus associated with Amelia, and particularly Pierce Township stood to gain millions of dollars by this dissolve taking place, because the TIFs, I believe all the TIFs were located in what was part of Pierce Township. So I've mentioned a couple things that I think are problems with the bill. By the way, I think there's changes are absolutely necessary. That's why I put myself down as an interested party versus an opponent. The most important thing is that the voting board, or whatever it's called in the legislation, that has the wind down, has got to have somebody on there that represents the citizens that wants to get it done. I can think, and I know I'll lovingly say the Claremont County Mafia has had plenty of people come here and talk to you, okay, of people that are long-term involved in Claremont County government, long-term involved. Most of them were opponents to the dissolve of Amelia when it took place, and that I've heard some of them testify to you here. So, because generally speaking, politicians don't like upsetting the apple cart in their districts or have things dissolve. And a lot of times they rely on political support from people like mayors and so forth of villages within their districts. So you've had a lot of that kind of testimony, but I'll say three names: Renee Gerber, Adam Rusa, Ed McCoy, they were all instrumental in dissolving Claremont County. None of them were even told that this bill was happening. And they could have given you unbelievable insight as to what needs to happen in a bill to make sure the village gets wound down quickly. If you're the county commissioner, the recorder, and the auditor in a county, how much, when you find out a village dissolved in your county, think of those people in your own counties, how much do you think you're excited? Oh, great, I get to be part of this. It's not something exciting. The people who are excited by it are the people that were the committee to lead the effort. And they should be represented on the board, and the voting members on the board of winding down. The citizens have to come forward to be on a committee to make a dissolve happen. They should be respected when they succeed. And I tell you what, the people that actually can pull it off and get a dissolve to happen, they are relatively sophisticated individuals. You know, they're not people that just fell off the apple cart or something like that. They're people that had to go through a process and understand the legal process to make it happen. So the board competition is one thing. Second thing is TIF cash flows have to be exogenously part of this. Because what happened to Amelia is they made the people keep paying to income tax, saying that there was a debt, when in reality the debt was a figment of their imagination because the TIF was going to pay off the debt. And I don't know, maybe somewhere in this bill that gets addressed, but I didn't see it exogenously addressed when I reviewed the bill. And the third thing is, what happens to what's left over? What happens to the money that's left over at the end? So people in Amelia, I want to say that they, again, don't hold me to it, but they kept paying income tax for like a year and a half. So here's my view. If at the end of the dissolve, the people that continue to pay income tax after the dissolve took place, which Rita would know, because all these villages, the money goes into Rita, they should receive either a full or pro rata refund of the income tax that they paid after the dissolve took place, so that they do not have to bear the brunt of paying money that's going to get transferred to a township. You heard Ms. Healy come up here. By the way, Ms. Healy works for Bonnie Batchelor, so she didn't mention that she's actually an employee of the county also. Okay? She just mentioned that she was a fiscal officer. But the notion that we're talking about whether the money that's left over gets spent for the benefit of the village or the benefit of the township or whatever, I have a much simpler solution. Any funds that were collected as income tax after the dissolve was certified by the Board of Elections, any then residual left over should be pro rata refunded to the people that paid the income tax after the dissolve took place. Very simple, citizen positive solution. The mentality of the people in Amelia who thought, look what's happening to us. Look what's happening to us. We are having to pay taxes with no end in sight, and the people that fought us tooth and nail are still collecting their salaries. Imagine how much more positive an environment it would have created there if they would have allowed those people to be able to know that they were going to get that revenue back. So I think, by the way, just one other stat I looked up before I got here. There's about, I believe, as much as we can trust the internet, but who would put anything on the internet that wasn't true? I'm joking. Okay, that there's something like 688 villages in Ohio. That's about 7.8 per county. And just in case, just to do a little cleanup to make sure that everybody's familiar, some of you may be from urban areas or what have you, is, so the difference between a village and a city in Ohio is that a village is under 5,000 people. If at any point in time you go over 5,000 people in a census, or you can actually do an early certification if you know the census is going to go over 5,000. The funny thing is, some people had encouraged Amelia to do an early certification because they were over 5,000. Had they done that, they would not have been able to dissolve. Cities can't dissolve. Only villages can dissolve. And just as a matter of policy in Ohio, I think you'll find probably where you're from too, the mover and shaker of local government in Ohio at this point is townships. Okay, I don't know how many new villages are forming in Ohio. I'm assuming pretty much none. Because the reasons why villages were needed historically that were created before, sometimes counties, before, that's why you have them straddling lines and stuff in an odd way. Those needs aren't there anymore. You can do all that stuff in a township. So a lot of these villages are never going to go over 5,000 people. In Ohio, and I think personally in Ohio, we're really overgoverned. We've got lots of layers of government. And so it's also something in a bill like this that you want to make it easy for citizens to reduce the size and scope of government over them and be able to move past. So I just want to address that. I thank you. I apologize for going too long if I did.
That's okay. I just wanted to see if you were wrapping up.
I am wrapping up.
Thank you. So I believe we have a couple of questions. Representative King.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Hicks, are you attorney or what are you, what is your occupation?
I tell people I'm a sales consultant, but I don't do that much sales consulting work anymore. I would say I'm basically an activist type person now, but I'm also not an attorney.
So it's my understanding that a petition to dissolve doesn't require a committee, that it can be one person circulating petition. Is that your understanding as well?
I think there was an amendment that was going to be put forward that got pulled for this meeting that would have stipulated that the committee has to be a number of people.
But it can be one person circulating committee.
Yeah, I don't know what through the chair, I don't know what the statute exactly says today on that. So, but every petition I have seen from actual petitions in 4 instances typically have 3 people.
A follow-up, please?
Follow-up.
Are you aware of any precedent that has this type of unelected type of representation? Representing this type of dissolution?
Well, if a township administrator got appointed, that would be an unelected person. So these people are more legitimately, through the chair, these people are more legitimate than some bureaucrat that works for a government agency. They were actually the people that drove a drive that's much like you guys getting elected.
Representative King, do you have a follow-up? Can you turn your mic on?
It is, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay, thanks.
I can hear her.
No further questions.
Okay. Representative Gross.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hicks, for being here. This is a wonderful discussion we're having. I'm going to ask you a hard question.
Uh-oh.
Do you believe this bill is ready to vote out of committee today?
No.
Thank you.
But it's my understanding it's been pulled from being voted out of committee because Representative Byrd has actually talked to me about this bill some, and that was being pulled for today. So because of other changes and so forth. So that's what I was told. And I want to give a compliment particularly to Representative Byrd because I think he's tried very hard to have a good bill. I just think it's lacking the citizen input of people that have been through the trenches of what's involved in a dissolve.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam.
Representative Stoltzfus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for coming today. Would you say the citizens of Amelia and citizens of Claremont County think this is a bad bill or a good bill?
I don't think that the people of Claremont County or the citizens of Amelia know about this bill.
Follow-up, Chair? So, I mean, this bill was introduced on March 28th. This is the 4th hearing. I guess you guys have TV and internet down there where people can come here and testify. I mean, every witness that's come has been a proponent. There's not been one opponent that I see, if I'm correct, Chair. So where are the people at that are opposed to it?
Well, I'm not aware. I do think that even people in Amelia, because the bowling alley closed, now have TV. So that's a good sign they now have TV. I'm not aware of there being any news story in Cincinnati, Ohio about this at all on any media. So I kind of resent the attitude that these citizens, well, why didn't they know about it? Well, when they were not told, when the people who were the key people in these drives for Newtonsville and Amelia were not told by the state reps that this bill was coming up, I think that was intentional. And I think that's wrong. Okay? So one of the things is you need to welcome input from both directions, because I guarantee you whatever happens, I've stood up here and said, these statutes need to be changed. But it can't just be one side. I could, through the chair, you know, I don't think I'm allowed to ask questions, but I could say, well, how many people have come here to testify like me that I'm not getting paid, jumped in my car, got here, didn't have time to put stuff together? I think a lot of the people who've had testified are on a payroll. And so what's been lacking in this is citizen input of people that have been involved in dissolves, and also input other than Claremont County on that. I don't know what the status is on your districts, you know, if villages have dissolved, but Claremont County hopefully is not the only place a village has ever dissolved. And there's lots of learnings there. Frankly, I think that for the complexity of this, what I would do, I said I'm a sales consultant. Before that, I described as I was a real consultant working with Accenture and IBM and so forth, is that I think scenarios should be mapped out, and they should be run through the bill. Here's 5 scenarios. Desk check the bill. Scenario 1, a village in one township without any TIFs, the simplest scenario. And then up that into scenarios, including I think at the top would be a village that spans multiple counties and townships and that has TIFs. And then run those through the bill and make sure that they all work out the way you would plan. Because what I think is not anybody's bad intent, but the prior legislation, it could be in this legislation also, is that what's happened is you put all this language down and the devil's in the details. In the prior legislation, the current statute is not adequate. I don't think probably this is adequate, but I think that one of the things that maybe is out of the normal thing that the legislature does is actually run some scenarios through it. Take some if this village did this, what would happen? And would all the bases be covered? Because I really think I'm a strong proponent in the statutes being improved in this, but I'm a strong proponent of those statutes being improved, and let's get it right now. Let's get it right now, so that we don't have to come back and find out there were a bunch of other unintended consequences that came out of this.
Representative Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I'm like some of the other members here. When there's no opposition, you just think that, well, everybody's okay with it. You know, and I was fine with it. But my question is, you mentioned that the people do not have a voice on the board. Just hypothetically, what would be a solution for you as this bill moves forward? I gather you're not totally opposed to the bill,
Right.
but you want to try to look at some other alternatives.
Right. I think that the board, for voting purposes, needs to be an odd number of people, right? So you can't have ties. Okay. So I think that absolutely 1 or 2 members of the citizen committee. So let's pretend that the citizen committee had 2 members. Okay. And there was a drafted resolution along these lines that's not ready for prime time probably, but then that would make the board 5 voting members. So the 3, the auditor, the recorder, and the commissioner would still be able to control the votes on that. But I tell you what is, and I don't mean to be too redundant, but what is the most frustrating to the people is once it happened, it became like a bureaucratic process where they couldn't even reelect people anymore. There was no more elections, and the people didn't have a strong incentive. If you put representation voting on that board that were people that were involved in the dissolve whole ballot measure, those people would have a passion about let's wind this down and get it done, okay? And you can still do that in a way that's not like let's hand the keys over to, a bunch of high school kids or something like that. I personally have a lot of respect for the people that go through the process because it's not an easy process. None of them get paid to do it. It's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. They get held up for disdain within their village by the elected officials and otherwise for daring to challenge the government's existence in that village. And I just think that when they've done that, I think you've just got to figure out how to architect that board where there is a strong influence of somebody or a few people that are highly motivated to get the process over.
Follow-up?
Thank you. No.
Representative Humphrey.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And then, Mr. Hicks, thank you for being here. I hate to be redundant, so I'm going to ask one question. But it kind of follows up with something that my colleague said. You said that you feel that, constituents in Claremont County and so on, their voices hadn't been heard, or folks who live in Amelia, their voices hadn't been heard. But I guess my question is, and you kind of alluded to they weren't a part of the process, but I wonder, what do you feel or what do you think about when we talk about the fact that they were paying taxes and, there was a dissolution. And so essentially, probably a lot of them probably weren't aware of where those funds were going. And so, I mean, if I was a constituent and if I was going through a dissolution, I would be maybe reaching out to my state rep, and I'm just kind of trying to figure out where you're coming from. I would be reaching out to my state rep or other officials to say, okay, if there is no village, where is my money going? And so I guess when you say voices weren't being heard, I guess is there any, proof of that? Because one thing I care about more than anything is I want to get paid. And if I'm getting paid, I want to make sure that, I want to know where my money is going when I'm paying other things. And the fact that that instance had happened, I guess I just believe that there probably was some communication, even if it was with regard to, there's no village here, where's my money going, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I just wanted to talk to you about that.
Well, so first of all, the state rep, typically my observation was state reps don't take positions on these kind of issues. It's like taking a position on a school levy or something. It's like I'm not going to take a position on whether a village in my district should dissolve. So, and there's a lot of pass the buck. If you call your state rep, they're going to tell you to talk to at the time, I believe there was a state auditor appointed individual that didn't really have any authority, but call him, don't call me. And so in a spirit of feeling they didn't have a voice after the dissolve, I've been trying to focus a little bit here on, so I want to separate having a voice after the dissolve has been approved, okay? So to get it wound down, that's one thing. But to go back to that, when they had the meeting in the middle school gym, middle school, it wasn't really the gym, it was like a theater area. So you had this optic of a table across the top with 13 people. I have video of this, you can watch it, you can watch the whole thing. 13 people, nobody could answer a question. Everything was the people looking at each other, nobody felt empowered to say this is, and the people that had led the dissolve and all the citizens, the 68%, they were all down, not just in the crowd, but the people on the table were like an elevated stage. So the distance between them was enhanced by this. And there was a lot of angst because one of the individuals there was also a council election at the same time. I think somebody made reference to this. And so somebody had been elected mayor in the council, but then when this thing came down, the way it got adjudicated was that person would not be sworn in as mayor, but the person who was the mayor that lost, who was against the dissolve, they would be mayor until the village was completely wound down, including getting paid. So that's how you get the feeling of that you didn't have a voice. And because if there would have been, I tell you, I'm not good with some of these things, but I tell you, if there would have been somebody on that stage that was a representative of the people that were on that committee, it would change the tenor of everybody on that stage. Because I would think of it, most of the people that did this dissolve, I found, are working class people where 1% tax matters, but 1% tax is not the reason they do it. It's other things. It's police abuses, it's this. When they were going door to door for the Amelia dissolve, the people who were for the dissolve, they actually got stopped by the police and told they needed to have a permit to go door to door in Amelia. They filmed it, and then they called me, and then I called some of my lawyer friends, and it went away real quick. But that's the kind of things that happen in there in terms of feeling like I'm trod upon. So just put yourself in the shoes of they worked so hard across 2 elections to get this through. And then what happens is the people who fought them every step of the way are getting their salaries for another 1.5 years, and I still have to pay the income tax. That's the kind of spirit. And I think that, frankly, in Ohio, we do have, I know it's personal, but we have more villages than we need. People don't like to admit that there's villages that are never going to grow, and they need to, maybe they'd be better off and more financially efficient under township control. But so I think citizens should actually feel good about, acting to reduce the size and scope of government on villages that are declining and, get them out of the way kind of thing. Does that help answer your question? Through the chair, I apologize.
Not really, but I'm going to let other people ask questions.
Actually, Representative King is next.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Mr. Hicks. I think it's important to note that this particular bill will require a transition supervisory board of elected officials. So the people do have a voice. It's their county recorder who's elected, their county commissioner who's elected, and the township trustee who is elected. So they do have a voice. They do have representation.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
If you would like.
Yeah, I think those were excellent talking points for the kind of people that back this bill as is. Don't worry about it. Your county recorder, your county auditor, I tell you what, those people are not particularly connected with people in a small village that have dissolved. And frankly, I think they would be offended by the notion that they're represented by these people when it comes to dissolving their village.
Actually, I would like to respond to that before the follow-up as a local elected official and a former county commissioner. I know many of the people in my villages, and you're speaking to a committee of former electeds who spend a lot of time out knocking on doors and going to village and city council meetings and township trustee meetings and meeting with lots of people to hear their voices and to represent them, not only here in Columbus, but previously in county courthouses and village and city halls. So, but Representative King, I think you had a follow-up.
Thank you. As someone who spent 21 years in local and county government, I take offense to that. Cared about my constituents dearly, represented to the best of my ability, and my phone was always accessible to anyone who wanted to share comments or input. So I do take offense to that.
Representative Stolzfus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I don't have your written testimony because it's not on the iPad, but could you state your name one more time, and are you a citizen of Amelia?
No, my name is Christopher Hicks, and as I said in my remarks, I live in Claremont County, and I volunteered and helped the people in Amelia through their campaign, including all their creative, their campaign materials, signage, et cetera.
Follow up? So just to be clear, you are not a citizen or were not a citizen of Amelia?
I think I was clear.
Yes or no?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Cecil Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, I'm just doing my little research, listening to the conversation, and it looks like back in November of 2019, the voters of Amelia voted in a proper democracy, if you will, voted to dissolve the village. You had indicated that the people weren't involved. Well, the voters voted, then it's been going on for a while now, going back to November 2019, and they voted. How do you argue that?
The issue I keep trying to bring up, and I want to be clear on, is once the dissolve is approved, okay, what happens then is where it fell apart. So, by the way, before the dissolve was approved, as I pointed out, and I just want to be clear, the citizens in Amelia had to do a charter change in a separate election before that in order to even dissolve their village. So they had to go through 2 election cycles because the charter had restrictions in it on being able to dissolve. Once the dissolve was approved and the election results were certified by the Board of Elections, that started a process that I think somebody heard say they're still not dissolved all the way yet. And so for like a year and a half of that process, they continued to pay income taxes. They had the situation where the people that had fought them, that were the elected officials and otherwise, were still getting paid. Okay, and so that created the issue. There's a front end issue of doing it in the first place, and that this bill is largely about what happens after the dissolve takes place. And so after the dissolve takes place is where it went awry, because now you had people feeling, I tell you what, these people were patriots to stand up and do this, and they felt proud. You know, we did something, the democratic process. Then they went through a year and a half of hell, where they felt like they were being mocked by the people that fought them, still getting paid, and them still having to pay an income tax with no way to ever get any of that money back.
Mr. Chairman.
Follow up.
Madam Chair. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, sir, but they voted and they've been involved in the process. So I don't understand how the argument now is after the dissolve takes place, then what? It's still, for those who were opposed to this and those who were supporting this, it's still left up for them to stay engaged. And obviously, they have chosen not to come forth. So I don't understand.
They did, on this bill in particular, they didn't know about it, okay? So I want to be clear on that. In terms of coming forth, they came forth, and they saw this image that I keep telling you, 13 people of bureaucrats across the table, nobody with an incentive to get this done, and them down in the pit. And to be honest with you, it demoralized a lot of them. That they felt like it enhanced the view, because a lot of these were working class people, it enhanced the view in their mind that our government doesn't work for working class people. That even when I went through this whole process, now it's like they're mocking me by paying the people that fought me, and the lawyers all getting rich on this deal as I keep paying income tax. So they didn't feel their voice was being heard because they continue to pay income tax and have the same people that they didn't want in office lording over them for a year and a half. And I think it's still going on some today, as was said. It's still not totally done.
Representative Troy, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
This also will be the last question.
Yeah, I just don't recall everything being that exciting there when I was there 40 years ago. But the There was something you said, I have a question. You said that the TIF that the Village of Amelia had issued would now be a windfall for the township. And I don't understand it because a TIF is usually, you're redirecting previously voted tax revenues to pay for some infrastructure or to pay for some improvement. And that's the only place the money can go to. And well, if they paid for the improvement and they're still collecting it, the county budget commission should be cutting that off.
Through the chair, with apologies, that's not correct. So TIFs can be for use for safety services and other expenses in this point in time. So that's long been changed in statute. So for example, the township I live in, which is Union Township, Claremont County, about $5 million a year comes off a TIF. It's probably the most prolific TIF township in Ohio, but something on the order of $5 million a year spins off of TIFs that's used specifically for safety services, police, fire, et cetera. So the notion that the old days of TIFs could only be for like build the road and that kind of stuff, that is not the way TIFs work today. And so a lot of the TIF revenue that comes off of things for years into the future as an annuity is actually revenue that gets directed into safety services and other thing, which is a legitimate use for a TIF these days.
Thank you all for this great conversation, and thank you for being here to testify. And I would like to recognize Representative Stoltzfus for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move we favorably report this bill and recommend its passage.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Chair John,
Yes.
Vice Chair Dean. Ranking Member Brennan.
Yes.
Representative Creech.
Yes.
Representative Forehand.
Yes.
Representative Gross.
Yes.
Representative Hall.
Yes.
Representative Humphrey. Representative King. Representative Klopfenstein.
Yes.
Representative Plummer. Representative Stoltzfus.
Yes.
Representative Cecil Thomas. Representative Jim Thomas.
Yes.
And Representative Troy.
Having received the required number of votes, the bill is hereby favorably reported.